eyes, know yourself, realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to fill the world with love.
Well, welcome everyone. My name's Allan, and welcome to this morning's live stream on YouTube. So this morning I'll be interviewing Debbie Hoad, and this is our second part of the interview that we conducted on the 11th of October last year. And you can catch that interview in Humanists Australia's YouTube channel, and the handle is @Humanists Australia. So in part one, we explored with Debbie how she got into the church and her experiences with it. We also explored how Mormonism is one of those high control religions governing every aspect of a member's life. Now, this time we'll focus on Debbie's experiences in leaving the church and what her life is like now. So for participants who missed the first interview, Debbie, can you please describe how you first got into Mormonism and what your role was in the church?
Sure. And I'll do this super briefly because, as you've said, people can always go back and watch the first session if they want to. So my parents, after we migrated to Australia, when we migrated just before I turned 5, when I was 6 years old, they met some Mormon missionaries who were door knocking and ended up being baptized and joining the church. We did go to church, but not super actively for a number of years. But then when I was 13, I started became involved with the youth in the church, and I started to go very religiously. I was an active practicing Mormon for the next 30 years of my life. So, yeah, until I was 42.
And thanks. Now,
and sorry, you said role in the church. Yeah, basically from just before I turned 18, I've always had what's called, it's a calling in the church, which means you have some kind of official role. I was a teacher for almost all of my time. I was a youth leader, a young women's leader. I was a seminary teacher, Mormon teenagers, every school day, basically, from in Australia, it's year 8 till year 11. They attend early morning seminary, which is 6:30 till 7:15. And I did seminary when I was a teenager. And then I also taught seminary as an adult for about 4 years. I was a young adult rep, which means you organize activities and stuff. So Sunday school teacher at some point. I taught the kids for many years. So yeah, I had a lot of teaching roles and other various things. Sometimes I had 2 callings. I was a pretty busy Mormon, I got to say.
And I'm thinking in seminary and when you were teaching, I imagine it wasn't a kind of debate, questioning, investigative process. It was, here are the true doctrines. Was there much encouragement of people to think independently in that?
Now, see, that's interesting because there's a Noam Chomsky quote that I'm not going to get correct. And I wish I'd thought to have it nearby because it's very relevant. And what he's basically saying is the way that you control a group of people in the way they think is that you allow space for very lively debate within a set of very firm parameters. So you could debate in church, you could question, you could do all of those things. As a teacher, I kind of loved that, and we'd talk about things. But it's not really true to say that we ever moved outside of the indoctrination, the set kind of. So I could question aspects of Joseph Smith's behavior, the founder of the church, but I couldn't question whether he actually was a prophet or not. Do you know? And I think that the salient point here is that you know without being told what you can and can't question. And maybe when people are young, they might question something, but the response that they get makes it very clear that that's kind of outside the scope. So it's an interesting phenomenon, because I would say that some of our lessons were quite lively and quite, certainly I wanted as a teacher for my students to ask questions and give opinions and all of that. But I don't think we ever had a class where someone was like, well, I just don't even know if there's a God, right? Like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And there's a lot of information, there's a lot of indoctrination, there's a lot of repeated ideas, so that you're not feeling browbeat, but you've heard that thing 30 times before. It's something you already see as fact taught to you. Yeah.
The questioning within confines, and going back to Noam Chomsky, it reminds me a lot of Orthodox Judaism. There's a huge amount of debate within the Orthodox Jewish schools about how to interpret the law, but you never question that it is the law and the Jews are the special chosen people of God. They're unquestionable, but there's a huge amount of debate about how to interpret the law.
Yeah, I think that's a good example.
So I know there are two ways of referring to the church. One is with the informal label of Mormonism, but it's got an official name as well. Can you say a little bit about what the difference is between the two of them and the attitude of the church?
No, I welcome that, actually, because there is a chance that, at some point a Mormon may be watching this, and you will see online a lot members of the church getting annoyed by the idea that people aren't saying the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or that they using the term Mormon. What is really important to understand about that discourse is that there is a level of sort of disingenuity to it, because when I was growing up, everybody said Mormon. Like, members of the church called themselves Mormon. We had stories about, people being dyed in the wool, true blue Mormons, right? There was in the 90s, the church ran a campaign they spent millions of dollars on a campaign called I Am a Mormon, and had Mormons telling their stories about, their life. And then at the end it was like, I'm a sports person, and I'm a dad, and I'm a whatever, and I'm a Mormon, right? And that ad campaign was heavily invested in. It was very popular. I know people who made videos for it. So later, the church had a particular prophet, Russell L. Nelson, who had a bit of a bugbear about this, and he felt that it was wrong. It's a thing he'd expressed for many years, that we should use the name of the church, and when you say Mormon, it's a victory for Satan, like just crazy, right? But one of the reasons, and this is call it a conspiracy theory if you want, but I think there's some truth to it, is that so the internet age arrived, and there's a lot more information available. When you search the term Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you are much more likely to stumble upon church-approved material and information. When you search the word Mormon, you are understandably more likely to maybe stumble across some stuff that could be more critical of the church, or at least doesn't just offer the official narrative. So personally, I think there is some truth to the idea that discouraging the use of the word Mormon and Mormonism is a way to a little bit maybe contain the information that members are reading, because they don't want them to read that information. And it doesn't work. The internet's not like that. But I think it's a tactic. But the other thing is that there's a useful narrative to apologists there to imply that ex-Mormons are disrespectful of the church, and that we want to insult the church and we want to make them sound terrible. And, that's why we won't use the proper name of the church. That has nothing to do with it for me. I grew up as a Mormon. I've always used the word Mormon. And to be honest, it's part of my life and my culture, and enough a part of my identity that I also feel like I have the right to use that word. I'm allowed to refer to the church that way and to call people Mormons because I was that person. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thing. So when I say Mormon or Mormonism, I'm in no way showing disrespect. And I do use that because also it's just a lot shorter. If I said Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints every time I was wanting to mention the church, we would cover a lot less information. So I'll leave it at that.
No, thanks for that. And I'm thinking about 1984 and control of the use of words, how words are used and what words are allowable and what they mean. No, that's a really good clarification. Now, you're active in the church for some 3 decades or more. So it's a long time. So what first raised your doubts about Mormonism, Mormon teachings?
Something I talked about in the first session. So I talked about a catalyst moment that concerns a book of scripture called the Book of Abraham. And I won't explain the whole thing again because it's there if people want to understand. But the crucial aspect of that is that it was the first time that there was a clear thing that I could not deny that Joseph Smith had to have lied about. And when you look at the evidence there, it's very clear. And that kind of gave me permission then to question everything. I would say that I had questions before that. And I honestly can't remember if I talked about this before, but in ex-Mormon circles, it's very common to talk about the idea of putting things on a shelf. So something will bother you. So, for example, in the Book of Mormon, one of the main characters is called Nephi. Nephi has an experience where he's trying to get hold of the scriptures from his uncle so they can take them to this new world with them. And he won't give them to him. And he then stumbles across this man pretty drunk, and he ends up killing him. And I guess the crucial bit of that is that the Spirit is whispering to him to do this. You will not, it's better that one man die than a nation dwell in unbelief, kind of thing. Dwindle in unbelief is the way I think. And so it's this idea that this was something that he didn't want to do, but that he had to do in order for, the gospel to then go with them to the new world, these scriptures. And I remember as a teenager learning about this and thinking, that's wrong. That's wrong. It's not right. You can't excuse killing someone just because it had, it's, a means to an end. And I felt quite strongly about it, but everybody else in the room was just listening to this information because they knew it already. And I was kind of like, okay. And I just stayed quiet. And I think eventually over a number of years, I managed to kind of convince myself that maybe God knew more than me, and maybe, and you talk yourself into things. And so I think it's very true to say that there were a lot of things that I had just put on that shelf. But when you reach that moment, and there's a lot of people who go through some kind of catalyst moment. For a friend of mine, it was when she realized the church's attitude towards her gay children. And it just clicked for her because she deeply loves her children. And that was the thing that made her go, oh, no, this is not right. This can't be true. And then she investigated and looked more and did all of that. But you need that catalyst moment to give yourself permission to just have that paradigm shift that opens everything up for you. That's a really common experience for that I've heard from many ex-Mormons. So I think you sit with the indoctrination and then something changes. And so I think there were a number of things that I was uncomfortable with. Polygamy, the history of polygamy, that wasn't great. Lots of those things. But then it was that moment that made me go, oh, yeah. The thing that, so that was kind of what first. And then when you start to really delve into it and you allow yourself to read information that's not from the church, it really falls apart. Yeah. And the process after that was fairly swift.
Right. And what you were saying about those stories that made you think that maybe those actions weren't morally the right thing to do. It seems like for many people leaving their religion, it's that recognition of moral incongruity, so it's not so much, it's not only just about they've got the facts wrong, they're lying about particular facts, but it's that moral incongruity. The church is moral doctrines saying this X is right, but my moral conscience is telling me, no, that's not morally right, it's morally wrong. So I find that really interesting. So you were...
and I will say a really good example of this, not from Mormonism, but from the Jehovah's Witnesses, is they formally shun. So if someone doesn't believe or leaves the church, their family must stop talking to them. And a very dear friend of mine, he has not had contact with his 3 children for, years now, because they're old enough that, they can choose not to see him. And they have followed their mother in shunning him. And he does hope that one day, they'll make contact with him. But if they do, the church will censure them for it. And so it's some things you look at and you go, that's just wrong. It's just wrong. How can they think that that's a right behavior? But when you're in it, there's a lot you can convince yourself of or excuse away. Indoctrination is powerful.
And that's part of the behavior control, which we'll get onto. But the other thing about the moral incongruity, the great example of the person you knew with the mother with the gay children, and for many leaving the church, or some leaving the church, it's that attitude to gay and transgender that finally tips the balance and moves them out of that church. And gay children themselves, gay people themselves. I've spoken to many people over the years who left the church because they're gay and because they were considered intrinsically sinful. Or maybe not intrinsically sinful. They say...
love the sin, not the sinner. I love the sinner, not the sin.
Yeah.
It's not wrong to feel it as long as you never act on it.
Act on it.
A lot of harmful ideas.
Extremely. Okay, so you were in the church for more than 3 decades, and you had all these doubts piling up, but you stayed within the church for quite a while. So what was it that finally tipped you into thinking you can't stay in the church anymore? What was happening there?
Yeah. So again, I'm trying not to cover ground we've already covered, but what I would say is what kept me in is very much, I was deeply involved. I loved teaching. That was a big part of it. I had good friends. It was my social network. And I did honestly believe for a long time, I think I compartmentalized a little bit in order to do that. But I do think my belief was always quite genuine. I prayed earnestly. I read my scriptures really wanting to understand them, things like that. So when I realized the church was not true, I started to sort of pull away. I gave myself some time to process before I actually stopped attending. And then, so there's a difference between not attending church and actually formally leaving it. And the thing that really was the moment where I couldn't stay, I had to formally resign my membership, was Prop 8 in California. And even when I was a faithful Mormon, I was never opposed to same-sex marriage, because in my mind, it was a civil matter. And I felt that religion had no right to control whether someone could visit their partner in a hospital or inherit the house they both lived in after they died, or that kind of thing. It always felt wrong to me that we as a church would try to influence civil law that way for people who didn't believe what we believed. I did believe that the church had the right to not marry people or to think the way it did. So I think that was an issue that I was I was already sort of on board with the fact that no, same-sex marriage should be legal. And the church, when it came to that, Prop 8 was about same-sex marriage in California. And the church actually sent a letter to bishops in that state that was to be read at the pulpit, and it actively encouraged the members to become involved in that political matter, and to actively campaign either, I can't remember if it was for Prop 8 or against Prop 8, but basically against same-sex marriage. And that was the moment where I was like, I not only have left the church, I cannot be formally associated with this church anymore. And that's what made me finally resign. Yeah.
So was it the repugnance against the church getting involved in secular political matters, or was it some other aspect that was the tipping point?
I think that it didn't surprise me that the church would not support same-sex marriage. But one of the reasons I was kind of angry about them getting involved in that way is that, firstly, I actually knew, not many people admitted this, but I do know there were a couple of people I knew online who were Mormons who were in California at the time. And one of them said, I don't agree with this, but I will do what the prophet tells me. And I thought, wow, like people are actually going against their own gut instinct about this because they're following orders and trying to, follow the prophet is a very old refrain in the church. So, but also the church makes claims to allow political freedom and to not get involved in political matters and to keep religion, like state and religion, separate. And the truth is it doesn't really follow that. And this was just a blatant example of that.
Right. So then you made the decision to formally leave the church. Can you walk us through how easy or how difficult that was for you?
Yeah. So like I was saying, there's a difference between not attending and leaving. People become less active all the time. That's not unusual. That happens. And, those people are always encouraged to come back. But what that means is if you leave the church and you actually want to leave the church and you don't believe it anymore and you never want to see, anyone turn up at your door again, you have to resign your membership, because if you don't, they will try to reactivate you for the rest of your life. So you really do need to kind of formally resign. And one of the problems with that is that not everyone's experience is the same, but in some areas the church leaders can make that quite difficult. So, for example, I know people who have told their bishop that they're leaving the church and that they want their name to be taken off the membership roll. And the bishop has insisted that they will need to meet with a stake leader who's a higher up leader. They'll need to have an interview, like all of these things, because they're trying to make it more difficult and just make sure that they understand the very serious decision that they're making. And, what will this mean for their covenants and, their eternal marriage? And one thing that the church did was that in the US, there's a wonderful website called quitmormon.com, and what they would do is they would give you a ready-made letter that said all the things you needed to say, and it made it very easy to resign. So people didn't have to think too hard about it. They could just be like, this is what I want, make the process easy for me. And the church introduced a rule that you had to have that your letter had to be notarized or something.
Yeah.
So it added not only time and difficulty, but a little bit of expense.
Yeah. God.
Yeah. And so things like that, little barriers have been put in. Now, why would the church do that? Why would they want someone to not resign their membership, right? They're already not going, because they don't want people to know that people are leaving. So they report their membership numbers at the conference each year, and they love the narrative. The church is growing, the church is burgeoning, and the truth is, if they reported those figures according to the people who actually attend church, there's probably about 35 to 40% that don't attend church that are officially members. So while they have not resigned their membership, they can still claim those people are members of the church, and it boosts their numbers. All right. So they don't want people to formally leave. So that process can be difficult. But the other thing I would say about that is you need to realize that there's also there are other repercussions of leaving. So, for example, I have a friend who has been an ex-Mormon and an atheist for many years now, but she doesn't want to resign her membership because her husband is still active, and in his eyes, when she gives up that membership, she's ending their eternal marriage. For him, it's such a deeply personal thing that even though she might not believe that, in his mind, they're still sealed in the temple, and this thing is so important to him. And so she has, not done that because she loves her husband and she doesn't want to hurt him. And it doesn't really matter to her because it doesn't force her to do anything, but it preserves something for him. And so similarly, if people resign their membership, especially if you have a gossipy bishop, their parents might find out and be angry about it, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of angst that can come with that decision. So is it easy to leave? No. And there's a lot of aspects to that, which I think we're going to talk about some of those as well.
So with the couple and the wife who didn't resign her membership, thinking about her husband, how does that work doctrinally about the afterlife? Because when he goes to the afterlife, his existing wife, she's not really a Mormon. So he thinks that in the afterlife, there's still going to be a union in the afterlife, even though she's not.
I can answer that. There is a doctrine that it's not 100% clear. So firstly, I think a lot of Mormons assume that everything can be fixed, right? So after you die, you'll have a chance to, you know, I don't know, change your mind. Let me be clear. Some of the doctrines that I'm about to describe are contradictory, right? I'm not trying to imply that they're not. I don't think that's unusual in religions. I think there's often things that don't align. There is definitely a teaching, and it's some time ago, so it's hard for me to sometimes remember the exact details. But there is a doctrine that basically implies that a faithful spouse may be able to kind of take the other with them. That marriage covenant they've made may save the other person in a sense. But I would say that that's probably a less discussed doctrine than, you know, this idea that you've just got to keep your covenants and you've got to do this to, you know, be with your family eternally. I think that's a much more prevalent idea. But I think that there is sort of an idea that the faithful one may be the one that then, you know, allows their children to be with the eternal family or something along those lines. But it very much contradicts the other doctrine that is like, no, you all need to be faithful or you won't be together. So yeah.
Interesting. So there's this convoluted process they put up to for you to formally resign. So in your personal experience, you're leaving the church. How difficult was it for you, and what were the repercussions then?
Yeah. Well, firstly, in terms of process, I was a little bit prepared, and I kind of practiced what I would need to say in certain situations because I'd seen other people's experiences. So I went to my bishop. I gave him a letter of resignation and just explained I was resigning from the church. I wanted my name to be taken off the membership roll. And he did start to say, okay, well then, you know, the next steps of this would be that you would need to, and I just said, look, with all due respect, let me stop you there. When I handed you this letter, I became a non-member. And all I need from you is confirmation that my name has been taken off the membership roll. Apart from that formal confirmation, I don't need any other contact from the church. Now, don't get me wrong, really nice guy. He took it well. My experience was good in that sense. And we had been friends, so, you know, and so for me, it wasn't too bad, but I everything that they would have questioned was in the letter. They couldn't come back to me for any of that. And so, yeah, so not too bad. I think that the hardest thing for me about leaving the church was actually all of the other stuff that follows it. So with my family, again, pretty lucky. I mean, most of my family wasn't active. My mother, who was, and I am grateful for this, and I always will be, even though she was a very faithful Mormon at the time, she said to me, I will support whatever decision you make. I have told people that story, other ex-Mormons. I've had people cry when I tell them that. That is not normal. And I know people who are no longer allowed to talk to their younger siblings. I know people who've, every family event now is an exercise in making them feel like shitty people because they're not active members of the church. And yeah, it's hard. So I count myself as very lucky in that regard. Some parents, they love their children, but they love the church more. And it's just kind of, or they're more committed to the church than they are to their kids. And maybe they see it as being committed to their kids. Maybe they think, oh, but this has to be a kind of tough love, because what if they don't come back, right? Yeah. But I think the part that was very difficult for me is the way my life completely changed. So I went from being part of a quite insular social group where it's not that I didn't know people outside the church. I worked with people outside the church, but I didn't really see them outside of work. I, played sport occasionally, or I did. So there were things I was doing, but my core group of closest friends were all Mormons. And I spent at least, apart from church, there would be at least one other thing during the week, maybe two, maybe three, that were church related. The friends I just hung out with when we got together to watch a movie or something, like, they were all Mormons. The movies we were watching were, never R-rated because the church would not approve of that. So everything in my social life and everything was based around church people. So when I left, I lost my entire social network. Now, I will say that there are probably, maybe half a dozen friends that this is not true of. People that stayed in touch with me anyway. And one family in particular who I was very close to, and they never abandoned me. But we also never talked about why I left. It was something very difficult for them to even think about. So it was kind of a weird situation, but I'm very grateful for them, to be honest. But it didn't really change the fact that pretty much everyone I saw on a regular basis, I suddenly wasn't seeing at all. And I'd had a good 30 years of not really having to make new friends and suddenly I, or at least not having a controlled environment in which to make those friends, put it that way. And finding new people, finding new community, figuring out how to meet adult friends who I could hang out with. It was so difficult. It was so difficult. And it happened. It ended up happening. But that loss of community is huge. And for some people, they're also losing their family. So, even worse. Yeah.
Before we go back to the social friendships aspect, I'm interested in maybe the worldview aspect, because I know with the Pentecostals, a lot of things that happen in your life, getting a new job, getting a speeding ticket, finding a new boyfriend, all of these things are literally guided by God. God is guiding the events quite intimately in your life, and you've got to stay on track with God, and then God will bring the right things to you, and the things bad that happen to you are tests of character.
Every one of them is a stitch in the tapestry, and you're only seeing the back of the tapestry with the threads and not understanding. And one day God will turn that tapestry around and you'll understand how everything fit into the story. Yep.
So with your life as a Mormon, did you see God playing a hidden hand behind the play of life? And then when you left Mormonism, I'm wondering how cognitively and emotionally how that impacted you. because previously God was in charge of your life. Were you now left without any moorings? What happened there?
Yeah, I think that that definitely was part of my experience as a Mormon. I think there's a lot of confirmation bias involved in that process where things happen and you attribute them to, they seem to confirm that God is, either looking out for you or testing you or teaching you something. And we do learn from our experiences. We do gain knowledge and experience. We do learn how to interact with people. But I was interpreting that as God having an influence in my life. So I think that there's a lot of truth to that. When I left, I think I was making decisions, and I don't think I had trouble making decisions, but I think what was true is that I went through a period of time where I realized I had lost the meaning and purpose of my life. So as a Mormon, there's a very direct path through life. And I didn't fulfill all of those things because I never married and I didn't have children. But apart from that, so it basically goes, you're born, you're baptized, when you become an adult, particularly if you're a man, you serve a mission for the church. Women can, but many don't. They don't have to. It's more taught to them that they should be thinking about marriage. You get married, you have children, you don't wait to do that. You have children as soon as possible. And then you raise a righteous family, and then, et cetera, until eternity. So I had grown up very much seeing that as the purpose of my life, is that I was supposed to find an eternal companion. I was supposed to have children with that person, and I was supposed to raise and love my children and teach them. And that would be my primary purpose in life. I can tell you, Les, it's a very interesting moment in my life when I got to a certain age where I suddenly realized that I wasn't actually sure I wanted to have children. And I had never examined this objectively enough to allow myself to think that. And don't get me wrong, if I had had kids, I mean, there are plenty of kids in the world that I adore and knew them through growing up, and really enjoyed being around them and helping them and teaching them and all kinds of things. But so I don't doubt that I could have enjoyed being a parent. But I realize now that my strong desire to be a parent was also a product of the way I was indoctrinated, because I really was made to feel like if I didn't have kids, I really wasn't doing my sort of purpose in life. It was something that I'd never be fulfilled if I didn't have children. And that's just complete rubbish. Like, it's not true. Plenty of childless people have good, fulfilling lives, right? I certainly do. And so, so I think there was this path, and also not just purpose in life, but purpose each day. There was always something I needed to be doing, something I needed to be preparing for, something I was working towards, right? And when I left the church, for a time, all of that disappeared, and there was just this void. And suddenly I had to figure it out for myself. I had to decide what the meaning of my life was going to be. And I had to decide how I was going to spend my time, and like, what were the goals I wanted to work towards now, and what did I think being a good person was, and how could I work towards, things that would make me feel that I was becoming a better person, doing good in the world. I still wanted those things, but the path to them was no longer strictly clear. And so it was confusing. It was very challenging, and there's a lot to dismantle, which is something I think we probably do want to talk about, that whole dismantling process. But I don't know if right now, like you're asking the questions. So
I did want to explore just a bit more about this existential angst when you realized you were looking into the void. And because I know, we, in our ex-religious support network, we have people who literally have to go through decades or at least many years of professional therapy. But it sounded like you didn't experience the existential angst to that extent. You had, I'm wondering how much anxiety you did feel, or you felt it more just now as an intellectual challenge. Well, it's more obviously more than an intellectual challenge, because you're thinking about what are you going to do for the rest of your life. But it sounded like it didn't have that deep emotional impact on you as some people.
Yeah, I think the best way to explain this is that I'm quite a realist. I discovered through a fun quiz one time that not only am I a realist, but I really enjoy surrounding myself with idealists. And I think that is a very true description of me. I really love people who have that idealistic mindset, but I tend not to. So once I understand a thing to be true, it doesn't take me long to accept it and move through it. So what I would say is, I think I very deeply experienced that sort of staring into the void, and the void is staring back, and it freaks you out. It just didn't last very long.
Yeah.
So, I probably went through that for a few weeks, and really kind of feeling like, exactly as you said, like I had lost my moorings, and just not knowing what it meant and not being able to figure it out. And then at some point, the thought just clicked into my mind that, well, you just have to figure that out. That's what this is. You are going to need to think this through until you figure it out, what life's going to be, and then I was able. But I think for that moment in time, it was really a very startling idea that it's just gone. And I think I felt I had a similar experience maybe a year and a bit later, when I kind of realized that I actually didn't believe in God anymore. It might be later than that, because that would be through all the time I was actually looking at other religions. So maybe 2 years after, I was just looking at the world going, all I see here is the absence of God. And it's so obvious to me now. And I just realized one day that I just couldn't believe this, that even that there was somebody in charge of any of this. And so again, there was a moment of like, well, what does that mean? If there's no God, if there's nothing, what does that mean? And then again, I had a bit of an emotional crisis for about 3 days, and then moved on. So yeah, that's kind of where I was at. Yeah.
Right.
But I agree, it takes people sometimes longer, and that's fine. Everybody goes through their own process.
So let's talk more about this deconstruction process and then rebuilding your life to the next stage. So how did you go about this deconstruction? You've talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, so I think last time we spoke, I sort of talked a little bit about how there are some stages of leaving Mormonism. Now, what I will say as a caveat, everyone's experience is different. However, there are some very common stages, and particularly common for people who really genuinely believed, right? So if you were never really that into it, you probably don't go through all these stages. But everyone I know who was a dedicated, faithful, believing Mormon, pretty much every one of them went through the things that I'm about to describe. And you know, I've talked to hundreds of ex-Mormons at this point, because I try to be in ex-Mormon spaces. First, I was there as a person seeking support, and now I'm there as a person offering support. So, you know, I've literally been exposed to just dozens and dozens and dozens of stories. And so the two things I talked about previously were that, you know, initially I was very sad. And that didn't last long. It was like a matter of weeks. But I was very sad about this being false, about losing what I thought was my reason in life, all of that. And then you reach a stage where you start to look a little bit more into, well, what is the truth? And you start to like read information and look at evidence and do all of that. And it can make you very angry. And these two stages intertwine. So one is called, some people refer to it as the research stage, where you're just really trying to nail down all the things that they told you that was a lie. And what's the real story? And yeah, so you go through the research stage and you go through the angry stage, and sometimes you go through both of them at the same time. And I very much felt that I had a period of time where I was very angry because I felt that they had taken these 3 decades of my life away. And that doesn't mean none of it was good, but it does mean that there was an opportunity cost for me. There were other things I could have been doing in my life. The amount of money that I put into my callings, I could have traveled a lot more. Yeah, I could have had other relationships. I could have been friends with different people. There's a lot that I had lost. So yes, there was a very genuine period of anger for me. And then you sort of move to a stage of acceptance, and you deal with the fact that this was your life and now it's different, that those things will always be part of your personality, and that you're never going to not sort of have been part of Mormon culture. There'll always be things that I don't have to explain to other ex-Mormons because they just get it. That I do have to explain to other people about, you know, my life experience. Yeah. So dismantling then starts as part of this. Like you're starting to dismantle the ideas you were taught. You're going through a process of like, for me, it was, do I still believe that thing? Is this a thing that is only the church taught me, and actually I don't think they were right about it now, and I'm discarding that idea, or I'm going to try to discard that idea? That can be difficult sometimes. And then what are the things that are still part of my core values? What are the things that I think are still me and that I will keep? And so you're dismantling sort of what is me and what is what I was taught to be, should be me. Then that sort of that led me to dismantle ideas that are very prevalent in the church, but that I would say are not unique to Mormonism. They're part of society as well. So, for example, patriarchy. The Mormon church is extremely patriarchal. It's hierarchical and patriarchal. Gender weaves its way through every part of Mormon life. And it makes differences in the roles you fill in the church. So, for example, women have many different callings in the church, but women are only ever leaders over other women or children. So a woman is never the Sunday school president. That's always a man. You know, a woman does not preside, even at the women's meetings. Like even the general women's meetings where the world women's leader is there, a man, a priesthood holder, presides at that meeting, right? So this thing is woven through every aspect in the way you dress is different, the way you behave is often different. There's overlap, but so gender is something I had to take apart, and I had to really question, like, well, and I was relatively lucky in the sense that my parents, they were pretty good for Mormon parents when it came to gender. Like, I was never discouraged from any kind of career or any kind of education. I played sport, just as diligently as I would have if I'd been a boy. Probably only dating. Dating was where they definitely, had some very sexist rules, and the way I was dating was not the way my brother was dating. So gender for me was a big one. I had to dismantle those ideas of gender, and I'd had a starting point because my parents weren't really rigid about those things, but the church I was in every week was. So I had a lot of those ideas in my head. And then there's things like, attitudes towards relationships and sex. I had spent a long time believing that only a monogamous relationship could be righteous. And then as I was exposed to different kinds of people, I discovered that actually there is a space in the world for ethical polyamory. And whether or not I personally might be drawn to that, other people are not wrong in living life differently to the way I might do. So, and I started to realize just these ideas, like, I would go through a process many times. This happened to me. I can't even count the number of times this would happen, where I would react mentally to a thing, and then I would step back from that and go, wait, is it actually wrong? So, someone would do something and I'd think, oh, that's not good. And then a voice in my head, a little reminder would say, wait a second, are you just judging them because you've been told that's wrong? And I'd pull it apart and I'd think to myself, I'd decide, like, do I actually think that thing is wrong, or am I just unfamiliar with it, or am I sort of judging it by standards that are arbitrary, and sort of go through that process. And through doing that, I was able to dismantle some of these ideas that, and I feel very differently about a lot of things now, even though I think I'm still a person with a fairly strong moral code. And it just went from there. So the church, it's not a blatantly racist church now. I think it was in its early days, to be honest. But it does have racist doctrines that are not much talked about now, but they still exist in Mormon scripture. So there's various things. Anyway, so racism was part of that for me. And I went through probably 5 or 6 years where I was actively exploring anti-racism, reading books on it, going to courses, and trying to dismantle any vestige of that in myself. And, and that was a dismantling process as well. So dismantling ideas and dismantling the way those are manifest in yourself is a really important aspect of leaving a high demand religion that many, many people, it's a journey that continues. And I wouldn't even say, I find now, I wouldn't say I'm at the end of that journey. I don't think we ever should be, to be honest. I think we should always be questioning our biases and our just evaluating, from time to time, why do we think what we do, what do we think, that kind of thing, and examining those things. And so, yay, philosophy, like very valuable people. If you're not into philosophy, go check it out. Because we do need to think about all of those things. But I do think I'm a very different person now, in the sense that I sit much more easily in discomfort. So there was a time where if someone told me I'd done something that was racist, I would have been immediately anxious, defensive. What do you mean? I'm not racist, da, da, da. Now, if I was to say something and someone went, that's a bit racist, I would immediately be saying, do you think so? How? Please tell me. And I would carefully consider what they were saying, and I would, accept the information. If I could see the sense in what they were saying, I would immediately just accept that information. So I think I had to go through a lot of years of trying to learn how to sit in discomfort, to deal with difficult thoughts and difficult ideas. But I'm much better at that now. So I think the journey has changed me quite a bit, and for the better. I think that's a super valuable thing in my life right now, is that I've been through that process.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing transition, going away from being in a patriarchal, quasi-racist organization to kind of flipping it. And you were talking last time, so in this last few minutes that we have, because we're already going over time, if anyone has any questions, please pop them in the comments, because we'll try and get to a couple of questions.
We never get to the humanism. We're
going to touch on it a little bit now,
Yes.
because last time you were talking about your transition through the Unitarian Universalist Church, and that was in Australia or United States?
Yeah, that was here in Canberra, in Australia. Yeah.
Oh, in Canberra, right. Because it was the Unitarian Universalist Church in the United States, and a number of their ministers got together with others to form the American Humanist Association in the
That actually doesn't surprise me. They're a
1950s.
very lovely crowd.
Yeah. Which is quite different to here, because over there they're still quite deistic, whereas over here it's more atheistic. From my experiences. So you had that transition period through the Unitarian Universalist. So if you could spend a little bit of time walking through that, and where you progressed to after that transition through the Unitarian Universalist.
Yeah. So I think in the first session I did really talk about that experience and sort of deciding that it wasn't for me. And that definitely was the last blast. If that variety of Christianity was not what I could deal with, I was never going to be a Christian again. That just wasn't going to happen. And so for a time, I think I was just relying more on sort of philosophical ideas and kind of delving into some of that. I'm a big fan of political philosophy, social justice theories, that kind of thing. So that kind of stuff interested me for a while. And then there's a group called Sunday Assembly. And Sunday Assembly is a non-religious, intentional community. It was actually created by a couple of comedians in the UK who thought that people should, they recognized that a lot of people went to churches because they needed community and connection with other human beings. But they were doing that often as people who didn't really believe, but that's where they could find community. So they created this intentional community so people could come together, hear an interesting idea, sing some songs together, and just socialize, have a community. And the idea actually really took off. I think they had about 5,000 people coming after only a few months. It became huge. But there are other chapters that have sprung up around the world of this Sunday Assembly idea. And so in Canberra for a few years, there was quite a happening little Sunday assembly community. And that's actually the group where I met the people who a few years later, we would get together and form the Canberra Humanist Society. And so that was the first place I ever met humanists. And shout out to Lyndon Story. I'll give him a tiny shout out. He was quite pivotal in that journey, I think. And before that, I had not even heard of humanism. I didn't know the word. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'd heard it, but never checked it out. Yeah. And what I found was that when people explained what humanism was, there was sort of a resonance in me where I was like, oh, I think I could possibly be a humanist. Huh. Okay. And that was it was so interesting to me. And I thought, yeah, I want to know more about this. I've got to delve into it. There were two things I was really interested in at the time. The other was secular Buddhism. So Buddhism, with all of the supernatural stuff sort of taken out, to me is a very intelligent, very accurate to human life type philosophy. Things to do with acceptance and the way we deal with pain, and lots of ideas in Buddhism are actually really valuable. So I was delving into that as to secular Buddhism as kind of an interesting thing. And I was, things like practicing meditation, that sort of stuff. But then humanism, I think, is secular Buddhism. I found a lot of interesting ideas and some personal practices. Humanism is where I found community. So humanism was the first time that I thought, these are like-minded people I think I could build a community with. And I think that when you're an atheist, so atheism is just you don't believe in gods. People will claim atheism is all kinds of things. All of them are wrong. Atheism is just, do you believe in gods? No, I do not. That's that. That's atheism. But what I do find is that that also means that atheism does not offer me anything in terms of how do I live, what kind of community do I want to be a part of and contribute to, how do I want to live my life? Atheism doesn't answer any of those questions, because atheism is just a lack of belief. Humanism was the first worldview I had come across in a while that made me think, yeah, I think there's some valuable ideas here where it can help to inform the way I want to be in the world, the way I want to contribute to society, the way I want to treat other human beings and animals and our environment and everything else. And that, I think, is what really drew me into it. Because I'll be honest with you, and we can talk more about that if you want to, but what I'm going to say is it's important to me that people understand humanism is not my new religion. I do not believe that I will ever again have a religion. And I neither want nor need humanism to be my new religion. I do regard it as my worldview, but, and I think there are spiritual aspects to human life, but I don't tend to put those two things together. So humanism is not where I find my spirituality. That's more about connection and people and nature and stuff like that. But humanism is valuable. And I think its non-dogmatic nature is very precious to me, because I can't ever be a part of a dogmatic worldview again. And I don't want to be. I wouldn't do it if I could. So those are the things that really drew me to these ideas and human thriving and people choosing the meaning of their life and taking on social responsibility. Yeah.
No, I think you've picked up some of those really important threads on what it is to be a humanist and what's encapsulated in the humanist worldview. So you're a leader in the Canberra Humanists. Can you say a little about that and what you're doing with the Canberra Humanists?
Yeah, so our organisation pivoted a little bit. We were first the Canberra Humanist Society, and we were very much, that was our little group. Several years ago now, we became, so Humanists Australia was formed, and we became kind of like a chapter of that organisation. And that's, I think that's been a good opportunity because it's also put us in touch a little bit more with other humanist communities around, and we knew some of them before and occasionally had events, but I think it's a bit more together now, which is great. So in that community, I have two main roles at the moment. One is I run a discussion group once a month, which we call the Values Discussion Group. The reason it's called, it actually came out of, it was something that started in Sunday Assembly, but when that ceased, eventually that discussion group came under the umbrella of the Humanist Society because we were willing to keep it going. And the reason it's called that is because no matter what we talk about, like memories or journalism or taxation or anything, doesn't really matter what we talk about, we try to include a kind of a values aspect and to think about how does that thing shape society, what does it mean to people individually, stuff like that. So that discussion group happens once a month, and that's been going for a good 10 years now, probably a little more. The other thing I run is the Humanist Book Club for Humanists Australia. And that one is a good one to mention for this broader audience because you can find that on Meetup, on the Humanists Australia Meetup. And because it's an online-only book club, we have had iterations where we met in person, but right now it's an online-only book club, which means anyone can attend. So if that sounds of interest to you, to read books that might, both fiction and non-fiction, that might have humanist themes or, other aspects, please feel free to check that out. And so, I facilitate that book club.
Oh, great. So if anyone has any questions, pop them in the chat now because we'll be closing up. And I wanted to ask you, Debbie, you've been talking about your life as a Mormon for more than 3 decades and now your new life as a humanist. How would you encapsulate concisely what your life was like as a Mormon and what it's like now to live it as a humanist?
Yeah, I would say that what I can observe about my life as a Mormon is that I think it was an environment in which I felt safe, and I would even say I think I had quite a sheltered life in Mormonism. I think that, and that doesn't go away. I think that when I left Mormonism initially, I was quite, I was maybe a little fearful of going out to discover the rest of the world. I deeply envy people who leave in their early 20s and they haven't yet had time to sort of feel that, closing in around them. So that took me a while to change. I think I had some good friends there. I think I did things I enjoyed, but I also think that there was a reasonable amount of the time I was more telling myself I was happy than actually being happy. When it comes to life now, it's not like life is magically great after you leave the church, even after some time. I don't think I'm a perfectly happy person, but I do think I'm a happy person. And I think that there's a lot in my life now that the meaning of it feels more genuine, because I sort of came to it myself, and because it has more real world application. And so, yeah, right now I feel very open to the world. I feel like I look at the world more realistically. I think I care about the world it's not that I care more, it's that it's different. I think that I was so focused on the church that a lot of the times when I wanted to help people and I wanted to do good, I was actually doing that within the confines of my church. Now, I think my aspect is broader, and the things I care about and the things that I spend time contributing to are maybe broader than before. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Oh, it does. Yeah, no, that's terrific.
Yeah.
All right. Look, thank you very much, Debbie, for being so giving. I was going to say forgiving, being so giving of your time. We've now done the 2 sessions. And like you said in the first session, we could be talking about Mormonism and escape from Mormonism to a new life for 6 or more hours.
Yeah, easily.
Do you feel like sometimes we've only just scratched the surface, Debbie?
I think that there's nothing we've talked about that I couldn't individually talk about. Like, I mean, just I mentioned seminary. I described that in like a minute.
Yeah.
I could talk to you about seminary for 2 hours. It wouldn't be difficult, right? So yeah, yeah. It's but yeah. Are there any particular questions people do have? Because I don't want to run out of time. I mean, maybe I've just said everything that they wanted to know. I don't know.
You've left them all very satisfied. I can't see any questions in the chat. So if anyone has a last minute question, pop it in now. And while they're coming up, I was going to say, we've talked a little bit about communities. To find out what the Humanists Australia communities are, go to the Humanists Australia website, humanistaustralia.org. And in the main menu bar there, you'll find communities, and go to communities. I would like to pop in the chat, but I haven't got access to the chat, the links for the Ex-Religious Support Network, which is one of the Humanists Australia communities. And Debbie is one of our facilitators in the Ex-Religious Support Network. So if you want to share your experiences and work your way through leaving your religion, I certainly encourage you to join the Ex-Religious Support Network. And looking to see whether there are any questions. Adele's asking a response to my previous comment. Oh, so I'll just read out Adele's comment, and if you'd like to respond, Debbie, she says, even without not being part of a church life, might still have, sorry, I'm just trying to get the cadence right here, even without not being part of a church life, might still have not been a bed of roses. It's hard for everyone to be a part of society. It's hard just being a human.
Yeah. I think that's a good insight. And to be honest, I think it's part of the reason that churches did not invent human community or human connection. Those things existed a long time before humans were religious. They existed before any of the churches we know. And I think that what actually more happens is that churches understand how humans work, and they sometimes for good and sometimes not. They co-opt those things, and they kind of use them to keep people loyal and involved. But I think Adele is exactly right that just being in society is hard. Being a human is hard. We have our very human needs for sort of connection with other people. It can be very difficult if you don't have those things. And some aspects of our society don't lend themselves to spending time with other people. I think it's been part of the online phenomenon that people think they're connecting online, but in actual fact, what several years of this has shown us is that people actually really benefit from seeing people in person, and that online connections can be quite important, but they're not the whole answer. So I think things like that, like, yeah, she's right. Yeah.
So check out the Humanists Australia communities on the communities page on the Humanists Australia website. So thank you again, Debbie, and thank you to all of our participants today, this morning, and we hope to see you at the next live stream. Bye-bye, everyone.
Clear your head, use your eyes, know yourself, realize, understand and empathize. We could learn to feel the world with love.